The warning lights flashed red across Lieutenant Minho Park's control panel as his small reconnaissance ship shook violently. He gripped the controls tight, sweat dripping down his face as alarms blared around him. The engine had just died completely, and now he was falling fast through the thick grey clouds of Kirith Prime. Come on, Minho muttered, fighting to keep the ship steady. Below him stretched endless white, nothing but ice and snow for hundreds of miles. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was just doing a simple scouting mission, checking on some energy readings the orbital station had picked up. Now he was about to crash on one of the coldest planets in known space. The ship hit hard, sliding across the frozen ground and throwing up huge clouds of snow. Metal screamed against ice as the vessel finally came to a stop against a large ice formation. Minho's head rang from the impact, and when he touched his forehead, his fingers came away bloody. But he was alive. He checked his equipment quickly. The communication system was completely dead. His emergency beacon might work, but rescue could take days or even weeks on this remote world. The temperature outside was already dropping as the planet's weak sun disappeared behind thick storm clouds. Minho knew he had maybe an hour of daylight left. He grabbed his survival pack and thermal suit, then forced open the damaged door. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through his protective gear. His breath came out in thick white puffs that froze almost instantly. This was going to be tough. Miles away from the crash site, Princess Nari walked alone through the same frozen wasteland. Her elegant robes, designed for ceremony rather than survival, fluttered in the bitter wind. She should have been surrounded by her royal guard, following the ancient path her ancestors had walked for thousands of years. Instead, she was completely alone. Her own people had betrayed her. The guards who were supposed to protect her had simply ridden away, leaving her to die in the wilderness. Court politics were deadly on Kirith Prime, and apparently some nobles wanted her removed from the line of succession permanently. They had chosen the cruelest method possible, abandoning her during the sacred winter journey when help would be far away. Nari's crystalline skin, which normally shimmered with a soft blue light, was growing dim. Her species could handle cold much better than most aliens, but even they had limits. The temperature was dropping toward levels that would kill her within hours. Her legs felt heavy, and each step became harder than the last. She stumbled and fell to her knees in the snow. Getting back up took almost all her remaining strength. Fear crept into her mind as she realized she might actually die out here, alone and forgotten. Her breathing became shallow, and strange dark spots appeared at the edges of her vision. That's when she saw a figure moving in the distance. At first, she thought it might be one of her guards coming back for her. But as the shape got closer, she realized it was something else entirely. A human, dressed in strange clothing she had never seen before. Minho spotted the fallen figure from almost a quarter-mile away. At first he thought it might be debris from his crash, but then he saw it move slightly. Someone was out there and they were in trouble. He reached the alien princess just as she collapsed completely. Her skin felt ice-cold even through his gloves, and her breathing was so weak he could barely detect it. Minho didn't know what species she was, or if his help would even work, but he couldn't just let her die. Without hesitation, he pulled off his thermal jacket and wrapped it around her shivering form, then lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, and her strange beauty struck him even in this desperate moment. But there was no time to wonder about who she was or how she had ended up here. He needed to find Nari's eyes fluttered open slowly, her mind foggy and confused. The first thing she noticed was warmth, real, genuine warmth that seemed to flow through her entire body. The second thing she noticed was that she was pressed against something soft and rhythmic, a heartbeat, a very fast, very warm heartbeat. That definitely wasn't Kirithian. She jerked back suddenly, her pale eyes wide with shock. Above her was a face she had never seen before, tan skin, dark hair, and brown eyes that looked down at her with concern. A human face. She was lying against a human's chest, wrapped in strange clothing that smelled like metal and something else she couldn't identify. "Hey, take it easy," Minho said softly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You were almost frozen solid when I found you." Nari tried to scramble away from him, her royal training kicking in despite her weakness. Humans were considered a lesser species by her people, barely civilized creatures who had only recently developed space travel. The idea that one had saved her life was both embarrassing and impossible to accept. "Do not touch me," she said in her own language, her voice hoarse and weak. "I am Princess Nari of the House of Winter Stars. You have no right to—" "Whoa, hold on," Minho interrupted, pulling out a small device from his belt. The universal translator hummed to life, and suddenly they could understand each other perfectly. "Princess or not, you were about to die out there. I'm Lieutenant Minho Park, by the way. Nice to meet you." His casual tone shocked her. He spoke to her as if she were just another person, not royalty who commanded respect from billions of subjects. No one had ever addressed her so informally, and she didn't know whether to be angry or curious about this strange human behavior. "You should show proper respect when addressing," she began. But her words were cut off as another fierce gust of wind howled outside their makeshift shelter. The temperature dropped so suddenly that even wrapped in Minho's thermal gear, she began shivering violently. Minho didn't hesitate. He moved closer and wrapped his arms around her again, sharing his body heat. "Sorry, Your Highness, but protocol isn't going to keep you alive right now." Nari wanted to protest, but the warmth from his body was like a lifeline. Her species could survive in cold that would kill most aliens, but these temperatures were beyond anything she had ever experienced. Without his heat, she would be dead within minutes. "This is not proper," she whispered, but she didn't try to pull away again. "My people will be outraged if they discover I was touched by a human." "Well, your people aren't here right now," Minho replied matter-of-factly. "And from what I can tell, they left you out there to die anyway. So maybe we shouldn't worry too much about what they think." His words stung because they were true. Her own guards had abandoned her, probably on orders from court rivals who wanted her eliminated. This human stranger had risked his own life to save her when her own people wouldn't. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. "Your species and mine are not allies. You could have left me there and continued on your way." Minho looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Because you needed help. That's what people do. They help each other when things get bad. Doesn't matter what planet you're from." This simple answer confused Nari more than any complex political explanation would have. On Kyreth Prime, everything was about status, bloodlines, and political advantage. The idea that someone would risk themselves for a complete stranger, especially one from a different species, was almost incomprehensible to her. As the storm raged outside, she found herself studying this human who held her so carefully. His heartbeat was steady and strong, his breathing calm despite their dangerous situation. He didn't seem afraid, even though he was just as trapped as she was. "What were you doing on my world?" she asked, trying to distract herself from how strange it felt to depend on someone else for survival. "Routine patrol," he answered. "My ship had engine trouble. Looks like we're both having a bad day." Despite everything, Nari almost smiled at his casual attitude. Here they were, possibly, about to die in a frozen wasteland, and he acted like it was just a minor inconvenience. She had never met anyone quite like this human before. 3 days had passed since they found shelter in the small ice cave, and Nari couldn't believe what she was witnessing. This human, Minho, seemed to create solutions out of thin air. While she had been taught that humans were primitive and clumsy, everything she saw proved the opposite. "How did you do that?" she asked, staring at the small but steady fire he had just built, using pieces from his crashed ship and some strange fuel mixture he had created. Minho looked up from adjusting the flames, a small smile on his face. "Basic survival training. We learn to use whatever we can find. These metal strips from my ship make good kindling when you coat them with hydraulic fluid." Nari shook her head in disbelief. On Kyreth Prime, fire was made using traditional methods that had been passed down for generations. The idea of turning spaceship parts into fuel had never occurred to her people. "But how did you know it would work?" "I didn't, really," Minho admitted. "But when you're stuck somewhere with limited supplies, you try everything. Most of the time it doesn't work, but sometimes you get lucky." He moved to their small water collection area, where he had set up an intricate system using torn fabric and metal pieces to filter and purify the melted snow. Nari watched as clean, drinkable water slowly dripped into a container he had fashioned from part of his ship's hull. "This is incredible," she said softly. "My people would spend days debating the proper way to purify water, consulting ancient texts and following precise rituals. You just figured it out." "Sometimes the old ways are good," Minho said, adjusting the filter. "But sometimes you need to adapt. Your planet is trying to kill us, so we have to be smarter than it is." What amazed Nari most was how he had found food. While she had been certain they would starve, Minho had discovered several types of lichens growing in protected areas of their cave system. He had tested them carefully, trying tiny amounts first to make sure they weren't poisonous. "I've lived on this world my entire life," she said, watching him prepare their evening meal. "I never knew these things were edible." "Your people probably never had to eat them," Minho replied practically. "When you have plenty of regular food, you don't usually go looking for cave moss." He handed her a portion of the prepared lichen, mixed with melted snow and some flavoring packets from his emergency kit. "It's not exactly fine dining, but it'll keep us alive." Nari tasted it cautiously and was surprised to find it wasn't terrible. "You're right. We always had servants to prepare our meals. I never learned about this kind of food." As the days passed, their conversations became easier and more natural. At first, Nari had tried to maintain the formal distance her royal training demanded, but survival had a way of breaking down artificial barriers. When you're huddled together for warmth and sharing the same small space, royal protocol seems less important. "Tell me about the weather patterns here," Minho said one evening as they listened to the wind howling outside. "You must know when these storms usually end." Nari nodded, grateful to finally contribute something useful. "The great winter storms follow a cycle. They usually last 5 to 7 days, then calm for 2 or 3 days before the next one hits. But this one feels different, stronger than normal." "Different how?" Minho asked, his attention focused completely on her words. "The wind sounds wrong," she explained, "and the ice formations outside are growing faster than they should. I think this might be one of the legendary century storms, the kind that can last for weeks." Minho was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Well, that's not great news, but at least now we know what we're dealing with. We'll need to ration our supplies more carefully." Nari was struck by his calm acceptance of bad news. Any Kyrithian noble would have raged about the unfairness of the situation or blamed someone else for their predicament. Minho simply adapted his plans and moved forward. "You're not like what I was taught about humans," she said quietly. "What were you taught?" he asked, genuinely curious. "That you were impulsive, emotional, and couldn't think beyond immediate needs. That your species was too young to have real wisdom." Minho chuckled. "Well, we are pretty impulsive and emotional, but maybe that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you need to act fast and feel your way through problems instead of thinking them to death." As she watched him work on improving their shelter, reinforcing weak spots and creating better insulation, Nari began to understand what he meant. While Kyrithian nobles would have spent days in council discussing the proper approach, Minho had already solved a dozen problems through trial and error. For the first time in her life, she was learning that there were different kinds of intelligence, and that survival sometimes required the kind of quick thinking and adaptability that humans seem to excel at. By the 5th day, Nari noticed something strange happening to her skin. The crystalline patterns that all Kyrithians were born with had begun to change. New lines appeared, flowing in directions she had never seen before, creating designs that seemed to pulse gently with a warm, golden light instead of her usual cool blue. "Minho," she said softly, holding up her hand to show him. "Look at this, what's happening to me?" Minho examined her hand carefully, his brow furrowed with concern. "I don't know. Does it hurt?" "No," she replied, surprised by her own answer. "Actually, it feels good, warm from the inside." She traced one of the new patterns with her finger. "These designs don't exist in any Kyrithian medical texts. I've never seen anything like them." What neither of them realized was that her body was adapting to his presence in ways that went far beyond simple temperature regulation. The constant contact with human warmth was changing her at a cellular level, creating new pathways that shouldn't have been possible. More unsettling was what happened when they were apart. During the few times Minho had to leave their shelter to gather supplies or check on the weather, Nari felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't just the cold returning. It was as if part of her awareness had walked away with him. "I can feel when you're coming back," she told him one evening as he returned from checking their perimeter. "Even before I hear your footsteps, I know you're getting closer." Minho paused at the entrance, snow still melting from his jacket. "That's impossible. I was completely silent out there." "I know it sounds crazy," Nari said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But it's like there's a warm spot in my mind that gets brighter when you're near. And when you're far away, it gets dim and cold." He sat down beside her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been feeling something weird, too. When I was out there just now, I kept getting this urge to hurry back. Not because of the cold, or anything practical. Just this feeling that I needed to be here with you." They stared at each other in the flickering firelight, both trying to understand what was happening between them. The physical closeness that had started as pure survival necessity was becoming something deeper and more complex. "Your people are going to be very unhappy about this," Nari said quietly, touching one of the new patterns on her arm. In Kyrethian culture, physical changes like this are seen as contamination. Once I return, if I return, I'll be considered impure, unfit for royal duties. Minho's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. You're not contaminated. You're adapting. You're surviving in a situation that should have killed you. If anything, you're stronger than before." His fierce defense of her surprised Nari. She was used to people agreeing with traditional views, not challenging them. "You really believe that?" "Of course I do," he said firmly. "Look at what you've accomplished these past few days. You've learned to eat foods you'd never tried, helped me understand weather patterns that probably saved our lives. And you're dealing with all these physical changes without falling apart. That takes incredible strength." As he spoke, Nari felt something warm bloom in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. No one had ever praised her for her actual abilities before. At court, she was valued for her bloodline and political connections, not for anything she had personally achieved. "In my world," she said slowly, "strength is measured by how well you follow traditions and maintain proper behavior. What we're doing here, a princess and a human sharing warmth, surviving together, it breaks every rule I was raised with." "Maybe some rules need to be broken," Minho replied, "especially when following them would mean death." That night, as they settled in for sleep, Nari noticed that the strange connection between them had grown even stronger. She could sense Minho's emotions like distant music, his concern when she shivered, his determination to keep them both alive, his growing respect for her as a person rather than just a title. When she mentioned this to him, he nodded slowly. "I can feel something too. It's like I know when you're scared or hungry or thinking hard about something." "Is that normal for your species?" "No," Nari whispered. "Kyrethians don't form bonds like this with anyone, especially not with other species. What's happening to us shouldn't be possible." But as impossible as it seemed, neither of them wanted it to stop. The connection made them both feel less alone in the frozen wasteland. For Minho, it was like having a partner who truly understood what he was going through. For Nari, it was the first time in her life that someone saw her as more than just her royal status. "Whatever this is," Minho said softly, "we'll figure it out together. We've made it this far by working as a team. I'm not about to give up on that now." As sleep took them, wrapped together for warmth and survival, both wondered what they would become by the time rescue finally arrived. On the 7th day, they heard the distant sound of aircraft engines cutting through the howling wind. Minho quickly moved to the cave entrance, listening carefully as the sound grew closer, then faded away again. "Search teams," he said, returning to where Nari sat by their small fire. "Both human and Kyrethian ships, from the sound of it. They're looking for a son." Instead of relief, Nari's face showed worry. "That might not be good news for either of us." Minho frowned. "What do you mean? Rescue is rescue, right?" Nari shook her head slowly. "You don't understand the politics involved. My disappearance wasn't an accident." She stared into the flames for a moment before continuing. "My cousin Jae-hyun has been trying to remove me from the line of succession for years. He convinced the court that I needed to prove my worthiness through the traditional winter pilgrimage. Sounds reasonable so far, Minho said, though something in her tone made him uneasy. The route they chose was one that hadn't been used in over 2 centuries, Nari continued. They said it was to honor the old ways, but really it was because they knew how dangerous it was. The guards who were supposed to protect me were all loyal to Jae-hyun. They were paid to abandon me at the first opportunity. Minho felt anger building in his chest. They sent you out here to die. Exactly. And now that search teams are looking for me, Jae-hyun will want to make sure I'm never found alive. If those aircraft belong to his people, we're in serious danger. The sound of engines returned, closer this time. Through a crack in their shelter, they could see light sweeping across the frozen landscape. But instead of the systematic pattern of a rescue search, the lights seemed random, almost aggressive. Those aren't rescue ships, Minho realized. They're hunting us, Nari nodded grimly. Jae-hyun probably told the search teams that I was killed in an avalanche or fell into a crevasse. Finding my body would be unfortunate but expected. Finding me alive and healthy would ruin his plans completely. What about the human ships? Minho asked. Surely my people want me back alive. That's complicated too, Nari replied. Tell me honestly, what's the current state of relations between our species? Minho was quiet for a moment. Tense, very tense. There are factions in human space who think any contact with aliens is dangerous. They believe we should keep to ourselves and avoid entanglements with other species. And if they discovered that a human military officer had formed some kind of bond with Kyrethian royalty, they'd see it as contamination, Minho admitted. Or worse, they'd think I was compromised, maybe even turned into some kind of alien agent. There are people in our government who would rather see me dead than risk whatever I might have learned or become. The aircraft sounds faded again, but they both knew the search would continue. They were being hunted by people from both their species who had reasons to want them gone. So we have Kyrethian nobles who want me dead to protect their political plans, Nari summarized, and human extremists who want you dead to prevent interspecies cooperation. Looks that way, Minho said. We've become inconvenient to some very powerful people. As if to emphasize the point, they heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons being charged somewhere in the distance. These weren't rescue teams carrying medical supplies and warm blankets. These were elimination squads carrying military equipment. They're not just looking for us, Nari whispered. They're planning to make sure we never tell anyone what really happened out here. Minho checked his sidearm, a standard human plasma pistol with maybe a dozen shots left. Against multiple aircraft and professional soldiers, it wouldn't be much. Help. We need to move. This cave isn't going to protect us if they decide to use heavy weapons. Where can we go? Nari asked. The storm is still raging, and we don't have supplies for a long journey. I don't know yet, Minho replied, but staying here means certain death. At least if we're moving, we have a chance. As they quickly gathered their few possessions, both realized that their struggle for survival had evolved into something much larger. They weren't just fighting the planet's deadly weather anymore. They were fighting against forces that wanted to bury the truth of what had happened between them. Whatever happens, Nari said as they prepared to leave their shelter, I want you to know that these past days with you have been the most real experiences of my life. For the first time, someone saw me as a person instead of just a political symbol. Same here, Minho replied, and I'm not going to let anyone erase that, no matter who they are or what they want. Outside, the hunt for them continued, but now they were no longer just trying to survive the planet. They were fighting for their right to exist, as living proof that cooperation between species was possible. The rescue team that finally found them wasn't the hostile force they had been hiding from for days. Captain Do-hyun Kim, leading a joint human Kyrethian diplomatic mission, had defied direct orders to search the Forbidden Zone, where their emergency beacon had last transmitted. Lieutenant Park, thank God you're alive, Captain Kim called out as his team approached their hidden shelter. But his relief quickly turned to shock when he saw Nari emerge beside Minho. The Kyrethian princess looked nothing like she had 10 days ago. Her skin, once pale blue with traditional crystalline patterns, now showed intricate golden veins that pulsed with warm light. The changes were so dramatic that the Kyrethian members of the rescue team actually stepped backward in alarm. By the frozen moons, whispered Commander Soyan, the lead Kyrethian searcher. What has happened to the princess? Nari stood tall despite her exhaustion, meeting their stares with dignity. I have survived, Commander. That is what has happened. But when the medical team tried to separate her from Minho for individual examinations, both of them cried out in pain. It was as if someone had torn away part of their souls. The golden patterns on Nari's skin flickered and dimmed, while Minho doubled over, clutching his chest. Stop, Dr. Hyojin, the human medical officer, ordered. Put them back together immediately. When they were reunited, the pain vanished instantly. Nari's skin brightened again, and Minho's breathing returned to normal. The rescue team watched, in amazement, as the two seemed to complete each other on some fundamental level. This is impossible, Commander Soyan said, her voice filled with horror. No Kyrethian has ever bonded with an alien species. This is against every law of nature. Is it? Captain Kim asked thoughtfully. Or is this exactly what nature intended, when two species were forced to survive together? The journey back to civilization became a tense affair. The Kyrethian crew members whispered among themselves, some calling Nari's transformation an abomination, others wondering if it might be the next step in their species' evolution. The human crew was equally divided, with some seeing Minho as a breakthrough in interspecies relations, and others viewing him as potentially compromised. When they reached the main space station, news of their discovery spread quickly. Within hours, both governments were demanding answers. Traditional Kyrethian nobles called for Nari to be stripped of her royal status and exiled permanently. Human military leaders wanted Minho court-martialed for violating first contact protocols. But there were others who saw something different in what had happened. Progressive scientists from both species requested immediate meetings to study the unprecedented bond. Diplomats who had been working for years to improve relations between the two peoples saw this as proof that cooperation was not only possible, but could create something entirely new. The most dramatic moment came during the official debriefing. High Admiral Sungho, the head of human military operations, tried to separate Minho from Nari for security questioning. The moment they were moved to different rooms, both collapsed in agony. Their vital signs are crashing, Dr. Hyojin reported frantically. Heart rates dropping, brain activity showing severe distress patterns. If we don't reunite them immediately, we might lose them both. When they were brought back together, recovery was instantaneous. The golden patterns on Nari's skin blazed brighter than ever, and Minho's eyes showed a depth of connection that hadn't been there before their ordeal. What exactly are you two now? High Admiral Sungho asked, his voice a mixture of fascination and concern. We're proof, Minho answered simply. Proof that our species can not only coexist, but become something better together. Nari nodded, her transformed features showing a strength that commanded respect from even her harshest critics. I am still Kyrethian, and he is still human. But we are also something new, a bridge between our peoples that cannot be broken by politics or fear. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Here before them stood living evidence that the barriers between species weren't as solid as everyone had believed. The bond between Minho and Nari represented possibilities that no one had dared to imagine. Some saw it as hope for a future where different species could truly unite. Others saw it as a threat to the established order. But everyone agreed on one thing: the galaxy would never be quite the same again. As security cameras recorded every moment, both governments realized they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented. The question now was whether they would embrace this evolution or try to destroy it before it could change everything they thought they knew about the universe. The grand throne room of Kyreth Prime had never seen anything like it. Princess Nari stood before the assembled court, her transformed appearance causing whispers and gasps throughout the crystalline hall. The golden patterns on her skin seemed to glow brighter under the harsh judgment of her own people. You are no longer fit to bear the title of princess, declared Duke Jaehyun, her cousin who had orchestrated her exile. Look at yourself, contaminated by alien contact marked by unnatural changes. You bring shame to our bloodline. Nari straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze without flinching. I bring knowledge, uncle. Knowledge that could save our people from centuries of ignorance. Knowledge? Jae-hyun scoffed. What knowledge could possibly come from consorting with primitive humans? The knowledge that we've been wrong about them, Nari replied firmly. Humans aren't primitive. They're adaptable in ways we never imagined. While we debate proper protocols, they solve problems. While we follow ancient traditions, they create new solutions. I survived because a human was willing to share his warmth with a stranger. The court erupted in angry murmurs, but Nari continued speaking. In 10 days, I learned more about survival and cooperation than 20 years of royal education taught. Humans don't see barriers between species. They see opportunities for partnership. Meanwhile, in the human military headquarters, Minho faced his own tribunal. General Wonho, a veteran officer known for his strict interpretation of military law, sat at the head of a panel of stern-faced commanders. Lieutenant Park, you violated first contact protocols by engaging in intimate contact with an alien noble, General Wonho stated coldly. Your actions have created a diplomatic incident and potentially compromised human security. With respect, sir, Minho replied, my actions saved 2 lives and opened a door to better relations with the Kerethians. The princess has insights into their culture that could prevent future conflicts. Insights gained through questionable methods, another officer interjected. How do we know you haven't been mentally influenced by alien contact? This bond you've formed is completely unprecedented. Minho felt a familiar warmth in his chest, Nari's presence, even though she was light years away on her homeworld. The connection between them had only grown stronger since their rescue, allowing them to sense each other's emotions across vast distances. The bond isn't a weakness, sir, Minho explained. It's a strength. Through Princess Nari, I understand. Kerethian honor codes, their social structures, their fears and hopes. I can communicate with them in ways that pure military diplomacy never achieved. Back on Kyrith Prime, Nari was making a similar argument to her people. The human's thermal energy didn't contaminate me. It evolved me. I can now sense emotional states, detect deception, and understand motivations in ways that make me a better leader, not a worse one. Even if that were true, Duke Jae-hyun argued, you've violated every principle of racial purity that our society is built upon. You're no longer truly Kerethian. Then perhaps it's time for Kerethians to become something more, Nari shot back. Our isolation has made us weak and stagnant. The universe is full of species we could learn from, but we hide behind traditions that no longer serve us. The debate raged for hours, but something unexpected began to happen. Younger nobles, scientists, and progressive thinkers started speaking in Nari's defense. They had seen the footage of her rescue, witnessed the obvious strength of her bond with the human officer, and they were curious about what such cooperation might mean for their species. Similarly, in the human headquarters, a growing number of officers began to see the potential in Minho's unique position. Captain Do-yun, who had led the rescue mission, stood up during the proceedings. General, with respect, Lieutenant Park has achieved something our diplomats have been trying to do for decades. He's created a genuine connection with Kerethian leadership. Instead of punishing him, we should be asking how we can build on this breakthrough. As news of both proceedings spread, public opinion began to shift. Humans were fascinated by stories of their fellow species member forming an impossible bond with alien royalty. Young Kerethians, tired of their society's rigid traditions, saw Nari as a symbol of positive change. The turning point came when both governments realized they were facing a choice that would define their relationship for generations. They could condemn Minho and Nari, destroying the unique bridge that had formed between their species, or they could embrace the possibility of a new kind of cooperation. During a private communication between the two worlds, something remarkable happened. Despite being separated by vast space, Minho and Nari were able to coordinate their responses, their bond allowing them to present a unified argument to both governments simultaneously. You have a choice, they said in unison, those speaking, to different planetary councils. You can cling to old fears and miss this opportunity, or you can trust that evolution sometimes takes unexpected forms. We're not asking you to abandon your identities, we're asking you to expand them. The room fell silent on both worlds, as leaders contemplated a future they had never imagined. one where the boundaries between species might not be barriers, but bridges waiting to be built. 6 months after their rescue, Minho found himself in the most important meeting of his career. The conference room on Neutral Station Alpha 7 was filled with tense diplomats from both species, and war seemed closer than ever. A border dispute over mining rights had escalated into threats of military action. "The humans violated our territorial boundaries," declared Ambassador Kyuhyun, his crystalline features rigid with anger. "This is an insult to Kyrethian honor that cannot be ignored." General Martinez, representing Earth's interests, slammed his hand on the table. "Your people fired on our survey ship without warning. We have every right to defend ourselves." Minho felt Nari's presence in his mind, even though she was sitting across the room with the Kyrethian delegation. Through their bond, he sensed her frustration with both sides' stubborn refusal to understand each other. "General, if I may," Minho said, standing up, "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here." "Lieutenant, you're only here as an observer," General Martinez warned. "Actually, sir, I'm here because I understand something that might save both our species from a war nobody wants." Minho looked directly at Ambassador Kyuhyun. "Your Excellency, when you say the humans violated your territorial boundaries, you're not just talking about space, are you?" The Kyrethian ambassador's eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" "In Kyrethian culture, territory isn't just physical space, it's about respect and recognition," Minho explained. "The mining survey wasn't just crossing an invisible line in space. It was crossing into an area that your people consider sacred to your ancestors." Nari stood up from the Kyrethian side, her golden patterns glowing softly. "The lieutenant is correct. The sector in question contains the remains of our ancient colony ships. To us humans, flying through that area without permission is like someone walking through your family graveyard without asking." General Martinez looked confused. "But our star charts don't show any graveyards or monuments. It's just empty space." "To you, yes," Nari replied gently. "But to Kyrethians, the spirits of our ancestors travel those paths. We should have explained this cultural significance instead of assuming you would understand." Ambassador Kyuhyun's rigid posture began to soften. "You truly comprehend our ways, Princess. But what of their aggressive response when we tried to turn them away?" Minho addressed his own people now. "General, when the Kyrethian ships approached our survey vessel, our captain interpreted their formation as an attack pattern. But in Kyrethian naval tradition, that formation is actually a formal greeting, a way of showing respect while requesting dialogue. Are you telling me our ships almost started a war over a misunderstood hello?" General Martinez asked incredulously. "Essentially, yes," Minho confirmed. "The Kyrethians were trying to politely ask us to leave their sacred space. Our people thought they were being threatened and responded accordingly." The room fell silent as both sides processed this information. Through their mental connection, Minho could feel Nari's relief as understanding began to replace anger in the room. "This is exactly why we need better communication between our species," Nari said, addressing everyone present. "These misunderstandings happen because we make assumptions based on our own cultural frameworks." Over the following hours, Minho and Nari worked together to untangle months of growing hostility. When human negotiators couldn't understand why, Kyrethians insisted on certain ceremonial protocols. Nari explained the deep cultural meanings behind each tradition. When Kyrethian diplomats were baffled by human flexibility and willingness to change agreements, Minho helped them see it as adaptation rather than dishonesty. "Your species doesn't view contracts the same way we do," Nari explained to Ambassador Kyuhyun during a break. "Humans see agreements as living documents that can evolve as circumstances change. We see them as sacred bonds that shouldn't be altered. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different." Similarly, Minho helped his fellow humans understand Kyrethian decision-making processes. "They're not being stubborn or slow," he explained to General Martinez. "In their culture, major decisions require consulting with ancestral wisdom and considering impacts on future generations. What seems like delay to us is actually careful deliberation." As the negotiations progressed, something remarkable happened. Other diplomats from both species began asking Minho and Nari to help with their own cultural misunderstandings. The pair found themselves becoming unofficial translators, not just of language, but of entire worldviews. "I've been negotiating with Kairethians for 5 years," admitted Colonel Somin from the Human Diplomatic Corps. "I never understood why they always seemed offended during formal ceremonies. Now I realize I was inadvertently breaking their protocols. Every time." By the end of the week, not only had they prevented a war, but they had established new frameworks for future cooperation. Mining rights were shared, cultural sites were respected, and both species agreed to exchange cultural liaison officers to prevent future misunderstandings. "You two have achieved more in 1 week than our diplomatic corps managed in a decade," General Martinez admitted privately to Minho. "Maybe this bond of yours isn't a liability after all." As they prepared to leave the station, Minho and Nari realized their influence was growing beyond what either had expected. Other species had been watching the negotiations, and requests were already coming in for them to help mediate other interstellar disputes. They had become living proof that cooperation between different species wasn't just possible, it was powerful. So enough to change the 2 years after their rescue from the ice. Minho stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity station, watching as the first joint colony ships descended toward the planet below. Beside him, Nari's transformed features reflected the golden light of the system's twin suns, her skin patterns now a permanent symbol of what was possible when species chose cooperation over isolation. "Look at that," Minho said softly, pointing to where human and Kairethian engineers worked side by side to guide the landing. "6 months ago, our people were almost at war. Now they're building a new world together." Nari smiled, feeling his pride and wonder through their bond. The colony, leaders are calling it Harmony Prime. Not very creative, but fitting. Their connection had continued to evolve in ways that amazed scientists from both species. What had started as a survival mechanism had become something that transcended individual experience. Through their bond, they could not only sense each other's emotions, but actually share memories and knowledge in real time. "The research team wants to study us again tomorrow," Nari mentioned, her tone slightly amused. "Dr. Yejin thinks our bond might be the key to developing new forms of interspecies communication." "Let them study," Minho replied. "If it helps other species connect the way we have, it's worth it." The transformation in both their societies had been remarkable. On Earth, schools now taught courses about Kairethian culture and history. Young humans were learning that strength didn't always mean domination. Sometimes it meant the courage to be vulnerable and open to others. The story of how a human soldier had saved an alien princess by simply sharing his warmth had become legendary. On Kyreth Prime, traditional nobles were slowly accepting that change wasn't always corruption. Nari's evolution had inspired a new generation of Kairethians to explore relationships with other species, not through conquest or political alliance, but through genuine understanding and mutual support. "Captain Jiwon sent a message," Nari said, accessing their shared communication system through her mental link with Minho. "3 more species have requested mediation services. The Zephyrians and the Coral people want help negotiating a trade dispute." Minho nodded. Their reputation as cultural bridges had spread far beyond human and Kairethian space. Species that had been isolated for centuries were reaching out, curious about the possibility of genuine cooperation rather than mere coexistence. "Remember, when we thought our biggest problem was not freezing to death?" Minho asked with a laugh. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had just left me in the snow," Nari mused. "Would our species have eventually found another way to connect, or would we have remained strangers forever?" "You were never going to die in that snow," Minho said firmly. "Not on my watch, and honestly, I think we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not the exact same way, but the universe has a way of bringing together people who are meant to work as a team." Below them, the first permanent residents of Harmony Prime were setting up their homes. Human families lived next to Kairethian clans, their children already playing together despite language barriers and physical differences. What the adults had to learn through careful diplomacy, the young ones seemed to understand instinctively. The next generation won't see the barriers we grew up with, Nari observed. To them, this kind of cooperation will be normal. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Captain Suyung, now the official liaison for interspecies relations, appeared on their communication screen. "Minho, Nari, we've got something big," she said, barely containing her excitement. "The Galactic Council wants to establish a formal department of interspecies understanding. They want you two to head it up." Minho and Nari exchanged glances, their bond allowing them to share the weight of this moment without words. Leading. Such a department would mean responsibility for facilitating understanding between dozens of species across the galaxy. "What do you think?" Minho asked aloud, though he could already sense Nari's answer through their connection. "I think," Nari said slowly, "that a human once showed me that the best way to survive impossible situations is to share whatever warmth you have with those who need it. Maybe it's time to share that lesson with the entire galaxy." As they accepted the position, both realized that their story had become something much larger than personal survival or even interspecies romance. They had become living proof that the greatest strength any species could possess wasn't advanced technology or military might, but the simple willingness to reach out to others in their time of need. The frozen wasteland where they had first clung together for survival was now a tourist destination, marked with a monument that read, "Here, two strangers became one people." Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the place where the age of true interspecies cooperation had begun, sparked by nothing more complicated than one person's decision to share their warmth with another. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not conquest or dominance, but the radical idea that survival was always better when shared. Galaxy. Shelter fast, or they would both freeze to death before morning.